as some of you may know, I got my start in console gaming with the Sega Genesis. But even before Sonic dashed across my screen, I was introduced to gaming on a PC, specifically a 486 machine running DOS. Those early titles really captivated me with what I thought were the most realistic graphics at the time. I know many of you out there are console gamers and may not be too familiar with retro PC gaming, but trust me, there's something really special about bringing an old school machine like this back to life. So let's jump in and restore, upgrade, and relive the magic of this legendary 486 computer.
Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Tito, and this really heavy beige beauty right here is my family's actual first computer.
Now, my parents bought this way back in the very early 90s, we think around 1992, and it originally started its life as a 486 machine. I remember playing a lot of Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, and Falcon 3.0 on this very computer. Now, inevitably over the years, we gradually upgraded the machine, eventually putting in a new Socket 7 motherboard with a Cyrix 6x86 processor, which to my understanding was a competitor to Intel's Pentium chip at the time. So while the performance of this machine as it's currently configured is better than a 486, I wanted to restore this rig to its former glory days as a 486 machine for DOS-specific gaming. Some really awesome titles were released for Microsoft DOS, and I really want to enjoy these games I never got a chance to play as a kid. Now, I do have to give a huge shout out to my incredible mom because she actually kept all of our old computing gear super organized and in such good condition. I mean, look at this. This is the actual motherboard and 486 chip that was in our first computer, and it's in immaculate condition. Way to go, Mom. When I picked this up from my parents' house a couple of years ago, I immediately removed the CMOS battery, which is usually located here. These are known to leak, and this one was leaking pretty bad, as you can see by all the corrosion on the AT keyboard connector. Anyway, that's one of the things I want to address in this project, all that corrosion and getting a modern replacement for that battery. So the plan is to completely tear down the machine, deep clean all of the components like the case and power supply, which definitely appears to have years of caked on dust. I'll remove all the upgrades that we made over the years and swap in all of the original components to restore this beauty to its original configuration as a 486 computer. Next, we'll run a few bench tests to see how the computer performs as it did back in the early 90s. And after those tests, I do want to upgrade the machine to try and max out its performance. I don't want to change big things like the motherboard or processor, but things like the RAM and cache, I want to upgrade those items to see if we can get any performance gains by rerunning those bench tests yet again. And of course, this wouldn't be a Retro Renew episode unless we did some modernizing mods. So I'm going to add in something called a GoTech, which is a floppy disk emulator. Kind of like those optical drive emulators that I showcase on the channel for consoles, but in this case, it's for floppy disks. Yeah, these old things. Some of you watching may be too young to even remember these. We'll also be adding in a XT to IDE card, which will allow us to have a modern solid-state hard drive, which in this case will be an SD card. This is where the DOS operating system and our games will be stored. Also be installing this, the Monster FDC. This is a modern card that will control all of our floppy drives, including the GoTech and the 5 1/4 drive that I plan to add as well. And I want to switch out the old power supply cooling fan with a new one from Noctua to keep the noise level on this build as low as possible, since this is the only fan in the entire computer. Now, there are a few other things I will be upgrading on the computer, but we'll check them out later in the build segment of the video. We'll also give it some retro PC flair with some really cool stickers to really pull the whole project together. The idea is to have something that ends up looking like this. And when it's all said and done, I will of course install some of my favorite games and test them out. Again, my mom saved some of these old titles and I just can't believe we still have them. This here is our original Doom 2 big box, which came on 5 floppy disks, which is pretty cool. Now I have to give another huge shout out to Ben, who also goes by the name iFixRetro. He helped me out so much to properly set up and configure this PC. Without him, this video would absolutely not be possible. He even sent me this old school LCD monitor that has the period correct aspect ratio, so a big thanks to Ben. Ben also happens to be a professional console modder, so if you need any of your consoles modded, he is definitely one of the most experienced ones out there, so I'll leave links to where you can find him down below in the video description. Alright, now before we start working on restoring and building this retro PC, let me tell you about the sponsor of today's video, PCBWay. If you have an idea for a new mod or want to assemble an open source project, PCBWay provides you with the tools to make them a reality. From 3D printing services in an array of materials, all the way to other services like CNC machining, injection molding, and of course PCB and flex ribbon fabrication. So when it comes to taking your retro mods to the next level, PCBWay is the place to make that happen. Check out the link in the description for PCBWay to get $5 off your first order, and again a huge thank you to PCBWay for sponsoring this video. Alright, now let's go ahead and get working on restoring and building this 486. Okay, so to start things off, we're going to get the computer on the bench and start taking everything out and disassembling the whole case completely so we can give it a very deep clean. We'll kick things off by removing all of the expansion ISA cards, with the first one being the video card. This is a pretty run-of-the-mill Trident VGA card, model TVGA 8900C. This was in our original 486, but we reused it when we upgraded to the newer motherboard and CPU. Next, we have the Sound Blaster 16 card, model CT1740. I'm like 90% sure we bought this after we had the computer, but it was definitely used in this 486 machine. From what I've heard, this is a pretty standard sound card for the time, so I really hope this puppy still works. Now the last card here is a modem. This one is dated from 1998, so I'm pretty sure this is our 56K modem, but I won't be reusing it since I'm planning for this build to be completely offline. So now I'm just going to unplug this rat's nest of wires and just get them all out of here so I can remove the remaining parts. It's kind of crazy just how little wire management existed back in the day. Nothing like PC builds nowadays. I'm definitely going to try and keep the wires as managed as possible if I can, but I definitely think it's going to be a challenge. Okay, so here we have a Western Digital hard drive, and this machine actually was loaded with Windows 98, so I'll definitely keep this for my next PC build. And here we have the motherboard. I specifically remember my dad upgrading our 486 with this and being pretty excited. Here you can see that this is a model P5TXB Pro, and it's apparently a Rev 2 version of the board. I'll definitely be saving this for my Windows 95 PC build. And under the heatsink is the processor, a Cyrix 6X86 PR233. I think this was meant to compete with the Pentium 233 at the time, but was more of a budget option. Now I'm pretty sure this was the hard drive used in the original 486 machine, since it wasn't even hooked up to this one at all. Maybe I'll use this as a secondary hard drive for the 486 build, but we'll see. This here is a Acer 20-speed cd-rom drive, which was definitely added later, as you can see from the manufacturing date of 1997. So we got this probably about 5 years after we purchased the 486. And here we have the original 3.5-inch floppy drive, which I'll of course be reusing after we clean it. The model for this is FZ357, and it was manufactured by Shinon. This here is our 200 watt power supply made by Perfect, and this thing is in anything but perfect condition, but we'll change that once we get all the dust out and replace that cooling fan with a silent Noctua one. I mean, look at all the years of dust in there. So the case is almost apart. I just need to remove a few screws to get the front fascia out, and then feed all the front panel wires out, which was a bit more cumbersome than I thought it would be. And examining the faceplate more closely, we can see that this thing is in dire need of a deep clean. I mean, look at all of that dust that settled down here. It really shouldn't be that hard to get this looking like new again. And the last thing I removed is the 3.5-inch drive caddy, which also houses the internal PC speaker. So with everything removed, let's take all the parts outside and blow out all that years of dust. Now by far the most dusty component was the power supply. I hit this with a ton of compressed air to get it all out, but that just wasn't enough. So I cut the wires to the fan since I'll be replacing it with a new one from Noctua, and this should allow me to get in there with an ESD safe brush and further help loosen up the dust, and then hit it again with some more compressed air. Definitely glad I'm doing this outside because there was just a ton of dust. I then followed the same procedure with all the other parts. Used an ESD safe brush to loosen all the dust, and then followed it up with compressed air to blow it all out. So after the initial dusting outside, I decided I wanted to at least give the case a deeper clean using some water, dish soap, and an old toothbrush. They had some more stubborn spots that compressed air just couldn't remove, and I really wanted this machine to be looking as new as possible. My goal is to completely restore this to as factory fresh condition as I can. Alright, so as the PC case is out here drying, let's start to do some housekeeping mods and repairs to some of the components, starting with the power supply. I'm going to replace that old, dusty, and noisy fan with a modern, silent one from Nacho. This is a 12-volt NF-A8 FLX model, and it should be a direct replacement. And as you can see, it fits perfectly. Okay, so I'm going to secure it to the case with the old screws before tackling how I'm going to connect it to power. And what I decided to do is take one of these extension cables that came with the fan and cut off the male connector end. I'm then going to solder that to the power wires that the original fan was connected to. Having this connector makes it super convenient to connect the new Nacho fan and any future fan in case I ever need to make a replacement. I went ahead and removed the yellow wire, which is not needed for my application, and then went ahead and connected the fan to power using the new connector and tucked away the excess wire. Fantastic, our power supply is completely clean and ready for service with a new fan. Now let's move our attention to the motherboard and address the corrosion that the old CMOS Varta battery left behind. I'll start by addressing the corroded keyboard connector. This should be a pretty simple fix. All I'm going to do is drop it into a cup filled with distilled white vinegar, which should dissolve all that corrosion and leave us with a clean connector. Now we don't want to leave it in there too long, but it should clean up nice while we do the next mod, which is replacing the CMOS battery. But before we tackle that, I'm going to clean off the area with some more distilled white vinegar to remove any residual corrosion, and then rinse it thoroughly with some isopropyl alcohol, which will give us a good foundation for installing the new battery mod. So the kit I'm showing here is the Not a Varta CMOS battery mod. It replaces the old Varta battery and allows us to use a regular CR2032 coin cell battery. It incorporates a charge protection circuit so that we can use a non-rechargeable battery like the CR2032. This is a pretty clever mod, and I like that it makes replacing the battery if we ever need to so much easier, as the old Varta batteries were actually directly soldered to the motherboard. Now you may be asking, why do we need a battery at all in the first place? And well, that's to ensure we can save all of our BIOS settings once we get the computer up and running. And this is what the kit should look like when it's all put together. We'll go ahead and drop it in where the old battery used to be, ensuring we match the polarity marked by the plus sign. And then we'll go ahead and solder it in place. Fantastic. With the CMOS battery addressed, let's see how the keyboard connector is doing. Pulling it out of our cup of vinegar, we can see that it cleaned up really nicely. Here's a side-by-side comparison of how it looked before and how it looks now. I'm really happy with these results. So after thoroughly rinsing and drying the connector, let's go ahead and solder it back to the board. Awesome, so I think we got the motherboard all squared away and fully restored. Now let's start installing everything back into the case. We first need to get these standoffs onto the motherboard, which I think is how these were mounted back in the day. And they simply just snap into place. Now we can go ahead and grab the frame of our baby AT case, which is now completely dry, and go ahead and install our power supply. Next up, we'll reattach the front bezel by first feeding in our front panel cables and securing it with a few screws. Next, before we install the motherboard, I need to connect the power supply to the front power switch, which is what will allow us to turn on the computer. I actually marked up and took photos of the connection before removing them so I can remember how they go back. Now we can drop in the motherboard. It first needs to slot into the rear panel with these plastic standoffs, and then we can lock it in place by sliding it to the left. And then we can start dropping in all of our cards, starting with the Sound Blaster. Next up is the FTC Monster card. This will go into the top ISA slot and is responsible for interfacing with both the 5¼ and 5½ inch floppy drives as well as the Gotek. This here is the XT IDE card, which I'll be putting below the FTC Monster and will essentially serve as my hard drive using an SD card. And the last one to go in is the video card. I'm just going to be putting it somewhere in between the XT IDE and the sound card. And I'll go ahead and secure all of these to the case using the included screws. Next up, I'll connect the motherboard to power. Just make sure that the black wires here are in the middle. Alright, so I think we have enough stuff installed to do an initial testing of the computer, and really this is the moment of truth. Let's just hope this thing posts. Okay, so I didn't get an image, which was worrying at first, but that's because, like an idiot, I didn't connect the monitor. But after connecting it, we see that it does indeed post, which is fantastic news. This older 486, which probably hasn't been powered on in over 30 years, and the fact that it booted up is super exciting. Now, taking a look at the BIOS settings and trying to get things configured, I also wanted to connect the floppy drive to see if we can install DOS 6.22, which is the latest version. When installing these drives, you need to make sure to connect the floppy cable after this little twist here to have the floppy drive actually work. I didn't really know that at first. So, after getting the floppy drive working, Ben helped me through the DOS install. I'm using the actual disks my dad used for this computer, but this is unfortunately where we hit our first snag. While the floppy drive was working and able to read disks, the DOS setup utility said it was unable to install the operating system because it could not detect the hard drive, which in our case is the XT to IDE card that we have installed right here. So we decided to put DOS on hold for the moment and get the GoTech working, which we were able to do just fine after messing with a few jumper settings. So back to the XT to IDE, we thought we would try to get into the BIOS settings and resolve the issue from there. We adjusted the settings we thought we needed to make, but then when we tried to flash the BIOS to the EEPROM, we got this error: timeout when pulling the EEPROM. No matter what we tried, we just could not flash the BIOS. So Ben suggested actually flashing the BIOS directly using a programmer. So we removed the EEPROM from the XT to IDE card, put it into my XG ECU, and tried to flash it that way. We were able to successfully flash the BIOS, but when we put it back into the XT to IDE and into the computer, it did not recognize the BIOS. So needless to say, we hit a major roadblock, and I wasn't sure that I'd be able to finish this video, smashing my retro PC dreams. But then, a miracle happened. I went ahead and removed the old XT to IDE because, well, a new one came in the mail. This was actually going to be used for another project, but hey, we decided to try this as a last-ditch effort. And for whatever reason, it finally recognized the new Monotech XT to IDE as a hard drive. Anyway, I can finally start to install DOS onto the machine. Going through the setup was pretty simple. Just follow the on-screen prompts and remove and insert the next floppy when requested. We installed it onto the C drive, which is that CF card we have inserted into the XT to IDE board, and as you can see, I'm pretty excited we're making some good progress. And Ben is also pretty pumped that we were able to get DOS installed. I honestly couldn't have made it this far without his help. Now, for whatever reason, even though DOS appeared to have installed correctly, we just couldn't get it to boot. So one thing we realized we should have done was format the drive using the format command, and then use the fdisk utility to set the DOS partition. Then we ran through the entire DOS setup again, and when it was all said and done, we got DOS working, but for real this time. Phew. Anyway, now we could finally get to all the fun stuff like installing games. I tried a few classics like Wolfenstein 3D, which worked perfectly. And of course, the computer can indeed run Doom. It's not the smoothest, but hey, it works. So with everything finally up and running, let's go through just a couple benchmarks to see how the computer performs. Now, the website Phil's Computer Lab has a very handy benchmark suite that's got a bunch of tests you can run. I actually just dumped the files directly onto the CF card, which was far more convenient than loading them through the GoTech. Anyway, once the DOS Bench utility is launched, we can see the slew of tests we can run. I'll just go through a few of the popular ones, starting with Superscape. When researching for this video, this was one of the tests I saw a lot of folks use, and basically it will render a 3D environment and spit back the frames per second that the hardware was able to achieve. And by the looks of it, it would appear my computer scored a paltry 17.5 frames per second, which by today's standards is quite meager. Next is the Doom test, and here it's pretty obvious that the game runs pretty laggy. This is actually quite a long test, but in the end, I got a score of 8.44 frames. Yikes, that seems pretty bad. Hopefully with a few upgrades I have planned, we can improve upon this. Now the last test is the PC Play benchmark, again another 3D render, and as you can see, we got a pretty dismal 5.3 frames per second. So in summary, my childhood 486 got what I assumed to be some Pretty average or maybe below average scores. They're certainly not anything to write home about, but that's not the point of this build. I just want to restore my family's old computer to its original condition, and these results are fully in line with what I was expecting. But that doesn't mean we can't try and improve things, even if just a little bit. Like I mentioned previously, I didn't want to change any of the original hardware. As you can see here, the motherboard only has one bank filled with 4 1MB sticks of SIM memory. So I'm going to fill the other bank with 4 more to hopefully double the available RAM to 8 megs. I was able to secure 4 sticks of 30-pin SIM memory from eBay, so hopefully this does the trick. Now another area I noticed that could be expanded is the cache. As of right now, one bank is filled with 128 kilobytes. I wanted to fill the other bank with another 128 kilobytes for a total of 256. Now after populating the second bank, we need to adjust the jumper configuration here to reflect the additional 128 kilobytes. So thankfully, again, my mom also saved the original manual for the motherboard, and right here on page 13, it tells us how to adjust the jumper settings. Page 12 has the current jumper configuration for 128 kilobytes that matched what was currently on the motherboard. So I'm really hoping we can squeeze just a bit more performance with the added RAM and cache. Anyway, now that we got the cache jumpers all set, there is one last update that I wanted to do. And that's to add a heatsink to the 486 processor. These don't require a heatsink at all, but I just thought, why not? I really want this thing to last a good long time, so helping dissipate the heat away from the processor is never a bad thing, and I don't think it'll hurt anything. Alright, the moment of truth. Let's see if the newly installed RAM and cache register with the computer. Alright, so the computer did see all 8 megs of RAM. Remember, we are upgrading from 4 megabytes, so we're off to a good start. Let's see if it picks up the additional cache. And indeed it does. All 256 kilobytes of cache is recognized. Now all that's left to do is see if we get a performance boost. I'm going to run through all the same benchmarks, starting again with Superscape. 17.5 frames per second. I think that's pretty similar to what we got last time. Okay, well let's see what we get with Doom. 8.54 also seems to be similar to before. Okay, so the last one is the PC player bench test. Let's see what we get. Okay, 5.4. Man, all these scores seem pretty much unchanged, even though we doubled both the RAM and the cache. I honestly don't know much about 486 computers, but I was expecting at least a modest bump in performance. And if we compare the results side by side to our control benchmark from before, indeed we see that there were minimal, if any, improvements. Honestly, these quote improvements are likely in the noise and perhaps not really caused by these upgrades. Only Doom and the PC player benchmark saw these very modest gains. Well, regardless of the results, I'm just happy to have a running machine. And all that's left to do is to tie up the loose ends and get it all buttoned up. Here I'm connecting the various front panel buttons and LEDs to the motherboard, and here I'm connecting the front panel hard drive status LED to the header on the XT to IDE card. Next to go in is the cd-rom drive. Like I mentioned earlier, this is only a placeholder as this particular drive is not compatible with my Sound Blaster card. We got this drive later once we upgraded from the 486, and my plan is to get a drive that's compatible with the SB16, so if you have any period correct recommendations, let me know down below in the comments. And here's the 5¼ floppy drive. For some reason I cannot get this set up with the Monster FDC card, so again I'll have to mess with the BIOS settings some more to get this to register. If you know how to get this card sorted, please feel free to let me know. Next, I installed the 3.5-inch caddy that has the small PC speaker built in, which I then connected to the motherboard. And then went in the 3.5-inch floppy as well as the Gotek. It was a bit of a tight fit, but I managed to get them sorted and fully installed. Now before closing the case, I wanted to make sure everything was working, so I decided to install Doom 2 as one last test. And it went off without a hitch. Yeah, the frame rates aren't the greatest, but it's exactly how I remember it as a kid, so that's fine by me. Oh, and I nearly forgot to install the Sound Blaster drivers, so I went ahead and did that too. I also happened to have the original install discs, so that process was pretty straightforward. Alright, we're on the home stretch. Now on the back of the case, my dad labeled the ports with a permanent marker, and I thought initially that I would keep it, but ultimately decided to remove them since the port locations no longer match. I unfortunately only had 2 I/O covers, so I installed the ones I had and ordered a few more from the internet, so once those come in, I'll install them too. And finally, we can put the heavy beige sheet metal cover back onto the computer and button this thing up. And now for the fun part. To really bring this whole build together, I bought some of these PC case badges from Geekenspiel. He's got a huge selection of very cool stickers, but I just went with the very 90s looking Intel 486 badge and a sticker for my Sound Blaster card, because you gotta let everyone know you got Sound Blaster. And last we got the Graphics by Trident sticker, because well, that's what I got in the computer. And ladies and gentlemen, this right here is my childhood computer, fully restored and better than ever. To say this wasn't an easy build is an understatement. I have to give another huge shout out to Ben from iFixRetro for really coming through and helping get this computer back up and running. And I have to admit, it turned out even better than I had hoped. I've been wanting to do this project for a long time, and I'm just glad I was able to do it and have it working again. It just feels so good that the whole computer is clean and set up like it was back when I was a kid. There are still a few things I want to address, but I'll get to that in a minute. I just wanted to take a second to enjoy playing some old titles. The main games I wanted to get working were Doom and Wolfenstein, so no issues there. I even tracked down a copy of Falcon 3.0, which is a game I distinctly remember playing way back in the day on this computer, and thankfully there was a local seller who had a copy and was kind enough to meet me so I can pick it up in time for this video. I mean, look at all the stuff these old games used to come with. Big box PC games from back in the day are truly something else. And again, I just gotta thank the best mom in the world. She kept all this stuff in such good condition and even stowed away this joystick, which is the very one I used to play Falcon 3.0 back in the day, and amazingly, it still works, which is insane. Now, the question you may be asking is, should you build your own retro PC? And the short answer is maybe. After going through this build process, I would say it was quite the struggle, and if I didn't have Ben helping me, it's very likely this video would have not worked out. I do think, however, if I used regular period-correct hardware and stayed away from modern devices like the Xtida IDE and the FDC Monster, then things may have been a bit easier to set up. I found that getting those devices to work was a really big struggle. But that's just a hypothesis, and to be fair, getting a computer from this time period to work really just takes overall more effort. As computers evolved over the years, things became more standardized and much more user-friendly. Dealing with jumper settings and all of the BIOS configuration, it's a pretty steep learning curve, at least it was for me. And on top of that, I had to build this on a schedule, so there was that added pressure as well. But if you take your time and refer to videos online, and use resources like Phil's Computer Lab or the Vogon's Forum, I don't see why you wouldn't be able to build your own retro 486 PC. Anyway, I'm extremely happy with the results, and the whole experience has been immensely rewarding, and I'm really going to enjoy the heck out of this machine and try some DOS games I never got a chance to play. But with that in mind, there are still a few things I want to address on this 486 build. First, I want to get both the cd-rom and 5 1/4 drives working. This specific cd-rom is going to be going into my next PC build, and I'll be on the hunt for a period correct one that's compatible with this Sound Blaster 16 card. If you know of some decent budget-friendly options, let me know down below in the comments. The other thing I want to get working is the turbo button. By default, it is on, as indicated by the LED and according to the Landmark processor speed test. But if I press the turbo button, nothing happens. However, by pressing the Control, Alt, and minus button on the numpad, it then clocks the CPU down. And then magically, the turbo button works. But when I turn the computer off and on again, the turbo button goes back to not doing anything. If you know of a way to fix this, drop me a line down below in the comments. But other than those two things, I'm extremely happy with how this turned out. Anyway guys, there you have it. The family computer from my childhood, fully restored and ready for many more years of gaming action. Now if you enjoyed this video, I really think you'll like this one here, so check it out. And as always, thank you all so much for tuning in today, and I'll catch you again next time.